Hello and welcome to the week of spiritual alignment. I've really been looking forward to this one because this is where the magic happens. And it got me reflecting on my own journey. And let's say probably when I was 24 is when I started my spiritual path. But in all honesty, back then, it was one that was new age, and not just new age, but image-based spirituality, where I was really confined by the beliefs that I was taking in, by the concepts that I was starting to understand, by the way that I was presenting. And whenever you have image-based living, it is of the ego. And to me, that's not true spirituality. To me, true spirituality is the seeking of truth. Yes, sometimes externally, but more so internally. What I've recognized, even back then, even though it wasn't the most highest expression of spirituality, it was still me getting on path and getting into alignment. Because back then, that was me going from conventional living into a totally new path, one that was more aligned with me as an individual. What occurred back then was a car accident that actually took me out of the kind of common trajectory of working and, lifestyle, and threw me onto a completely different path. I still had a long way to go to awakening to many aspects of myself and existence, but it certainly was a form of spiritual alignment. Now, as I come to understand it though, really, spiritual alignment is about being on the path between who you are now and who you want to become. When you imagine your ideal self, the evolved future version of yourself, you could call it your potential, whatever term is fitting, but essentially between where you are now and where you want to end up. And that place that you want to end up is usually in complete alignment with your truth, your values, your expression, the way that you want to show up in the world, what you want to be doing, the lifestyle you want to be living. And so there's many aspects of it, but really it's your truth. That's the simplest way to frame it. So this week, it's really about helping you uncover your truth and then taking actions to align with that. I just want to share a few more thoughts around my own experience with spiritual alignment, because I think it's that important to really get an understanding of what it's like when we're in spiritual alignment and what it's like when we're out of spiritual alignment. So there's quite a few experiences I could draw on here. And the first one I'm going to relay is when I was overseas traveling. I had this amazing time on an island, made friends, stayed there for 6 weeks, just had such a fulfilling time that it opened me on a cellular level. And I was so profoundly just uplifted by it. I had this experience where I was on the beach, and essentially it was like a shamanic drumbeat of life was right there, and I was just in this vortex feeling the pulse of life, and I was like, I'm exactly where I'm meant to be in this moment. This real feeling of liberation and alignment. Fast forward 3 months after going and staying with Buddhist nuns, after doing some traveling, after going on a forward path, I had the choice to go to Bali by myself for New Year's, or go back to that island where I knew my friends were, where we could have, parties and whatnot. And I thought, on paper, that looks good. I'm going to go with that. And I made the mistake of trying to go back and recreate what was, not realizing that I was stepping back into a dynamic where things change and you can't pick up a memory exactly where it left off. So I go back, and where the first time was this uplifting, energizing experience, this time everything was melancholy and there was this kind of downward beat to the feel of things. And I went back to this same place where I experienced this shamanic pulse of life. And this time it was like a flame slowly flickering and dying. And I could sense the shamanic drumbeat off in the distance, what felt like probably Bali. And I realized in that moment, I've come out of flow, because instead of embracing uncertainty and taking the path of the heart forward, I've gone with the mind and what felt comfortable and secure. Now, obviously, like hanging out with friends and all that is cool, but I was trying to relive a memory. I was trying to go back to where I was before instead of moving forward. So spiritual alignment can manifest in that way. Certainly the path of the mind, comfort, security, versus the path of the heart, which can be uncertainty, but it's uncertainty that leads to growth and self-evolution. Now, one other time I want to share, I was traveling in Queensland and I'd bought a motorbike. I'd traveled from Cairns, taken my time down to Gold Coast, really cool trip. And I realized after having worked in the mines that showing up and being paid was not what I wanted to do anymore in life. I wanted to create value so that any money that came to me was the fruits of something I created and felt I was bringing value to. So I did some work away while I was in Queensland to keep the costs down. And while I was up there, a family member said, "Why don't you try Movies Extra work?" I went, "Yeah, okay." So I applied for this role and got it. And, Movies Extras don't take too much. It was about a 4-hour drive from where I was, and I was on a motorbike. So I didn't want to go early morning, wildlife, etc. So as I go to set off the night before, the farm I was staying on, the dog jumped the gate. It got one of the chickens in its mouth. And basically the owner that I was staying with couldn't get it. So I had to jump the fence, tackle the dog, get the chicken out of it. And it was just this chaotic event before I even got going. So I set off, and while riding, probably about halfway through, I go through the thickest swarm of bugs I've ever experienced. And it was so thick that I literally had to pull over and wipe my helmet, like intense. And just before going through that, I'd looked down at my odometer and I'd seen several repeating numbers. There was 222, 444, and I made note of it. I thought, interesting. And then this swarm occurs. I continue driving and I get to Brisbane at about 7:30, and I look at the booking detail for the hostel I was staying at, and they had an early or a late check-in of 7 o'clock, so I've missed it. I'm trying to call them, couldn't get through to anyone. I'm like, looks like I don't have any accommodation to stay in potentially. And I'm starting to get this sense of things not flowing. I managed to get to the hostel, someone checks me in. I wake up at 4 in the morning, just full of energy, so I start working on my business stuff. I go and get some clothing that I thought I would need for it. I get to the thing at like 9 o'clock. And apparently there's a term in movies, hurry up and wait. And I found that to be very true. Basically from 9 until 2, we were sitting around just kind of waiting. And so this was filming the Joe Exotic movie. And basically I was one of the extras in the background. So we go in, and I think it was this like long scene apparently, and long by movie standards. So I'm paired with an international person who had her back to the camera, so I'm kind of facing it, but it would be blurred out anyway. The director gave us explicit instructions. Okay, you're not talking, you're just going to mime. So really difficult to do. But as I'm talking, the person I'm partnered with starts actually talking. I'm like, trying to mime. She's like, "What?" I'm like, "No, we can't talk." And then, so what starts to happen after this, each time we go to do the scene, she starts looking at me and then just looks down at her food. I don't know if you've ever tried to carry on a conversation with someone, but it is so hard to have a conversation when someone is not giving you eye contact, when it's a fake conversation. We had to do this 30 times over. And I was like, wow, this is like for 3 minutes just carrying on this conversation. And because the camera's looking at me, I had to carry it myself. And yeah, it was quite draining. And then it occurred to me, she's getting paid the same as me. And I feel like I'm really putting a lot of energy into this where she's maybe not. And it dawned on me, I'd fallen back into the exact same paradigm I was trying to escape. I'd shown up, she'd shown up, and we were getting paid the same either way. Didn't matter the value we were bringing. And as that dawned on me, I was like, I've kind of gone back into the comfort zone. So fast forward, we get to about 6 p.m. And I look outside and I see the clouds are quite dark. So I look on the radar and sure enough, a big storm's coming in. And keep in mind, I'm on a motorbike. So I get to the motorbike before it starts raining. So I think I can get on the motorbike, I can make a bit of ground, and at least feel like I've made a bit of a journey towards where I'm going. I get on the highway, and as soon as I do, the skies open up and I am just absolutely getting pelted with rain. But I'm desperately looking for a spot to turn off and there's nowhere, and I'm just having to accept it. And then I see a turn off lane. So I go to turn off and something happens. My bike starts to lock up and I go into a tail slide. Fortunately, I don't really panic. So I just lean into it. From about 80 kilometers an hour, I'm now skidding in the wet sideways coming up to this intersection and manage to hold it together, come to a complete stop. Now in the pouring rain, blocking off the left turning lane. I'm trying to start the bike, trying to move it. It's completely frozen. So I take a breath, I step off, put the stand down, have a look at it, and I realize that the strap that held my bag on had come loose and it had wrapped around the rear tire and it had locked up completely. So in a calm state, I wind it back, get the strap out, get back on the bike, and realize to myself, that wasn't just not flowing, that was active resistance. And as I really thought about it, I was like, that's what's happened. I've literally gone from a place of being aligned with my purpose, of working on my business, and I've left that to go back to this path of security. And as I went through that swarm of bugs and saw those numbers, that was like me leaving the quantum field of here's the alignment, and there's me leaving back into material reality to get paid to do a job. And when you move away from what's most aligned for you, resistance presents. Not to punish you, but as you're going away from where your heart's calling you, resistance is being created to push you back towards the path of your heart. So I really just want to share that to instill this concept that there is a path of the heart and a path of the mind. There is resistance and flow. There is spiritual alignment. But also, I want to say, there's been so many times over the last 4 years that I've chosen the mind over the heart. For example, I could have gone deeper into coaching and I chose to take a job in the mines. Guess what? Resistance, big time. Over time, making consequential choices away from the path of the heart, I've just realized, you know what? It is so unbearable constantly choosing the mind. So even if you make a wrong choice, eventually it's going to push you back to where you want to be. So don't beat yourself up for maybe not being completely aligned, because ultimately you made the choice away from that because there was something of value. Like for me, when I went to the mines and chose to do that, it was because I had never been paid more than $100,000 a year and I wanted to experience that. Once I'd done that, I went, okay, money isn't everything. But trying to commit to that without having embodied that realization, that's not my path. But it was something that I needed to experience. So anyway, I'm going to end this here and I'll see you tomorrow.